I just want to firstly say thank you very much for joining on a Friday morning, the mental health panel. What this tells me that you are somewhat in tune with yourself or understand the importance of mental health. And the reason why we're doing this is because of those reasons, because mental health is so important and unfortunately something that's not often talked about. The other part of it is that in August, River City Labs, Advanced Queensland and Clever Minds Consulting has come together to work on focusing on mental health and enabling some services to the founders across Queensland through the Advanced Queensland Network, as well as through the Precinct and River City Labs. So checking in with yourself, either through your animals and how you actually find tools and tips on how to look after yourself and make sure that you're in tune with what's going on in your body is kind of what we're going to talk about today, but also recognizing the signs of what it looks like and some of the things that you can do as founders or leaders or professionals in order to keep some healthy awareness of your mind and your body and what's going on, especially when the pressure's all around us. 2020 is the perfect reason, without even saying anything else, with what's going on this year, for us to really have a look at what we've been doing and where we're running to and the challenges that we're all facing. There's a little dog, thanks Jason. The challenges we're all facing as not only founders and leaders, but as human beings. It's definitely been a remarkable year, not necessarily in the good way when it comes to the pandemic, but sometimes in a good way for when humans are standing up for themselves. And that has been experienced and seen globally. And it has connected us and unfortunately also brought economical challenges to a lot of startups and scale-ups across the country and globally. So without further ado, I would like to again thank you for joining in. And today we have a wonderful panel of experts and founders, and I'll introduce them shortly. But firstly, I'd love to actually acknowledge the commitment to reconciliation. And I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Yurraga and Turrbal people as the traditional landowners and First Nations people of the land where some of us are located and hosting this podcast, this panel from today. I pay my respect to the elders past and present, to emerging leaders, and I also extend respect to all First Nations people here today. And I would love to then introduce you to the wonderful panel. So first up we've got is Dr. Diane Harner. Dr. Di, if you can give a wave, thanks Di, is our expert on panel. Dr. Diane is not only a neuroscientist, but also a counsellor and has been providing her services across Brisbane, Queensland and nationally for many years, previously with executive coaching and now with her own practice. Diane has been working closely with the founders at River City Labs, the Precinct, across the region. And today we'll share her expertise in what is actually going on when it comes to mental health and what are some of the things to recognize. We've got Jason Aikens, the founder of Take. If you can give a bit of a wave. Jason, thank you. Scaling Queensland company extraordinaire. Experience of challenges himself in raising and scaling in 2020 and doing amazingly well. But not without the pain, of course, of what that looks like and what that takes, because it's not easy. We've also got Athol Han, founder, thank you, Athol, juggling and not only actually being a frontline health worker himself and supporting our frontline in the services, especially during a pandemic, but also building his own startup to better support health services across the country and globally. Trish Mackey-Smith, co-founder and CEO of Indocs. She's also scaling locally and globally. I know that Trish, while you're on this panel, your co-founder is actually meeting with a big client at the moment. So sometimes having to sacrifice those things as a CEO of a scaling company is quite difficult when you can't be in two places at once. And every opportunity to meet clients is a good one. So thank you for joining us today, Trish. And then we've got Daniel Allen, co-founder, thank you, and disruptor of mental health stigma for men in the blue collar industry. Daniel, you're an overall leader by example in what you're doing. You basically set out to actually help mental health become normal in the conversation by kicking off the company that's a conversation starter and now branching out to many different things. So I want to thank you again, guys, for joining the panel. So what we'll do first is a bit of housekeeping. If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them into chat. At the end, we'll also have a session on Q&A if you'd like to chat to any of our panel members or expert on panel. But feel free, and I will actually try and zoom in and catch the questions as they're going through. So don't feel free to actually pop them in there, and I'll try and get to them. So we're going to start with the basics first. So Dr. Di, can you just give us a bit of an understanding of actually what is mental health and who's got it?
Absolutely. The first thing to do is to differentiate mental wellness from mental illness. So both of those things exist on a spectrum, but they are not at either end of the same spectrum. So mental wellness is when we are in a state where we can realize our own ability, we have the capacity to cope with the stress in our lives, we can be productive, we can make a contribution. So that is at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum is mental unwellness. So this is when we might feel as though we can't cope with the stresses in our lives, we feel overwhelmed, we might feel demotivated, we might feel as though we can't think as clearly as we might do when we are mentally well. So at any point in time, we exist somewhere between mentally well and mentally unwell. So when we talk about mental illness, that is on a completely different spectrum. So the definition of mental illness is when we have a mental problem that significantly impacts our ability to function and is diagnosed by a specific set of criteria. Now, the reason why we need to acknowledge mental illness here is because if we allow our mental unwellness to go unnoticed and we don't take care of ourselves and we don't acknowledge it, it can then turn into mental illness. So the thing about mental wellness is that it changes. It can change day to day, week to week, month to month. So it's really important that we check in with ourselves to see where we are. The other thing to acknowledge here within the context of the founders is that our businesses also exist on a spectrum. So at any point in time, we're somewhere between stability and crisis. And what we need to be aware of is how our spectrum of mental wellness is matching up with our business spectrum as well. Because what we don't want is to be at the unhealthy, unwell end of our mental wellness spectrum and also be in crisis. So this is where I really am 100% all about what I call prophylactic counselling, which is about noticing when we're not doing well and being proactive about doing something about it so we don't really go to the unwell end of the spectrum.
Learned a new word. Thank you. I've never heard of that. And isn't that the better way to be? I've never even thought about business stability and crisis. You know, the spectrum of what that is in regards to health in your business. That's really interesting. So, you know, I'd love to go to our panel. Daniel, you know, what is a conversation starter and why do you think it's important that we start talking about mental health and creating awareness and education around it?
Well, Pauline, for us, a conversation starter is obviously the funky workwear that we make. You know, we're trying to take a much more, I suppose, chilled out and lighthearted approach to the conversation. I think we've felt for a long time that the mental health conversation has been very unrelatable. So we're really kind of trying to, just take that sort of a more lighthearted approach to be able to allow, I suppose, blue collar workers to be able to open up a little bit better. I think, you know, now more than ever, it's so important for us to embrace mental health. I mean, it's actually a really good thing. Once you start to learn and understand and embrace your own mental health, you can take ownership of your life, your situations, your actions, and you can start to take back control. So I think now more than ever is the most exciting time for us to be having these conversations because, with mental health at the forefront, embracing it in business allows everyone to have better outcomes, better results, better communication, and better lives in general.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Ethel, you know, in the work that you're doing, and if you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing, what are some of the things that you think is important, and why are you focusing in particular in your startup in that space of actually being able to better support the health workers?
Yeah, thanks, Pauline. And I really loved what Diane was saying about wellness versus mental health. I think it's really important. The wellness journey is completely different to the mental health journey to a degree, because once you tip over that edge and, you get to those stages of mental illness, it can be different. And so what I'm about is really about empowering health professionals to know what drives them, and it's because we want to do that preventative work before they get to that point of burnout and mental illness. And I see that quite a bit in not only health professionals but in founders. So we're high performing individuals. We take a lot on. We consider ourselves to be at the forefront, and we want to achieve so much. And when we get those setbacks that we've all had, we don't get funding, we have a tech issue, we have something go wrong, those issues start to build up. And if we don't have some strategies to nip them on the bud straight away, then they can just build up until the cup becomes too full. And so I see that not only in founders but in what the stuff I'm doing. And I'm really about trying to help people understand what's going on, so they can, when it comes to crunch point, that stress, the stress comes, then they can go, all right, they've got a little bit more perspective. And so, yeah, that's what we're up to in Fords. Fords is that's the mission of Fords.
Awesome. Jason, obviously, you dabble in the finance space, and obviously, given 2020 and the impact of a lot of companies, this challenge of keeping people afloat as a startup and scaling company, as well as trying to grow and get capital. What's some of the things that you're seeing in maybe yourself or others around you that, you would recognize as mental health being a bit threatened?
Yeah, good question. I think Diane's description of, being stable and in crisis in business is very relevant to startups, because more often than not, you'd be towards the crisis end of the spectrum. And I think that, for me personally, that means that I have to be ultra aware of how I manage my mental wellness to balance out, the constant crisis. And so in 2020, and leading into 2021, it's harder to access capital than ever before, since the GFC, I suppose. And so with short runways and teams and funding harder to get, the mental strain would be elevated for many founders and for their teams. So I think during this period, it's critical that we focus on mental wellness techniques and processes and try and balance that out and work as a community too. I think one of the biggest things for me during my journey is being part of a community and not feeling like I was on my own. And so those things are really critical.
Tricia, how is everything going with your scale up at the moment? What are some of the challenges you're seeing that commonly would obviously put you a bit under the pressure when it comes to your mental health?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to mention that was a great distinction, Diane, that you made between mental health and mental illness. And I just wanted to let people know that I've actually experienced a lot of mental illness in my family. And I actually lost a brother to suicide when he was just 21. And so I'm acutely aware of, keeping, monitoring your own, chatter, and also being aware of others around you. And and I've had that experience, and I'm so glad that it's more out in the open now, that politicians and celebrities are talking openly about their own struggles. And for me, being a founder, that's that's really pushing yourself to the limit, and you have to constantly be checking in on yourself and others. So yeah, it's been a trying time for me personally as a founder, but I've also had a lot of personal growth as a result, and both professionally and I guess mentally. So yeah, it's been a challenging time, but I think I've been used to chaos as well in my life, so I can be comfortable with that. And so yeah, as far as business goes, and having COVID hit, yeah, we had to really reassess everything, especially financially, and by taking an audit on our financial situation, that we had to make adjustments for our financial plans looking forward. But by doing that, that did alleviate a lot of uncertainty and anxiety.
Thank you, Trish, for sharing, and I am so sorry to hear that. I know that suicide has actually touched a few of the panel members. The whole trademark journey is on the back of a colleague, if you don't mind me saying. I know it's public, Daniel, but you know, you've got quite an interesting story on how you embarked on this journey. If you don't mind sharing a little bit, I'm not sure if the founders on the call know about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could take you back, 30 years on this journey, Pauline, to be honest. But yeah, in the trade sector, I was a tradie for 10 years. Moved up here from Sydney to Brisbane for 2 weeks to work for a builder. Never moved back. And yeah, through that journey, I became best mates with my apprentice at the time, Ed Ross, and we made a pretty formidable partnership on site. But after I lost one of my best mates, it was one of the first mates that I made when I moved to Brisbane 10 years ago. Lost him obviously very suddenly to suicide, and that was my first experience with suicide. And it became really blatantly obvious at that time just how much of a lack of understanding there is around mental health in this country. There's such a lack of information, I think. Well, I mean, there's a lot out there now, but it's still very misunderstood. I mean, even listening to Dr. Diane, and the way that she explains that, more people need to hear that. Those words from Diane need to be broadcast loud and clear. We need to differentiate this very multi-layered and very deep topic, because there's a lot to it, and it's just not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So I think the more conversations we can have like this about it, the more light we can shed on it, and the more approachable we can make it, we're going to see far better outcomes moving forward.
Agree. Di, I'd love to go to you, and can you describe, because I know with my own journey with mental health and wellness, I was quite clinical about it, and I followed a path. For those who don't know, I believe in getting a therapist. I would prefer to go to a therapist over a GP. So unless I've broken my leg, I'm really not going to go and see a doctor. But actually checking in with a mental health professional like Dr. Di for me is like a staple, especially if you're starting out on a business, like many of the founders on the call. But Di, so what are some of the things I didn't really recognize? A lot of the things I was doing as patterns and behaviors that showed up as symptoms to when you're going down the wrong path with mental unhealthiness.
Yeah. So this startup journey is ridiculously stressful. I don't think I've ever heard a founder say, "Oh yeah, this is really easy." So founders are under an enormous amount of stress, and then layer a pandemic and an economic downturn on top of that. And, the threat becomes absolutely overwhelming. But as you mentioned, a clinical path, I think I'm going to take this opportunity to share a bit of neuroscience with you all. It wouldn't be a webinar that I'm on without just a dash of neuroscience. So I think it's a really useful way to understand what's going on for you when you know what's going on in your brain. So there's a part of our brain called the amygdala, and it's like the smoke detector of our brain. It tells us when there is threat in our environment, and it's incredibly sensitive, because when our brain was evolving millions of years ago, it was saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths. But now it's financial pressure, it's uncertainty, it's not knowing whether your business is going to exist in a couple of minutes. months time. So these threats for startups are generally there, but now we also have a health crisis and we have this economic downturn, which is elevating our level of stress. So our amygdala right now is absolutely pinging. It is seeing threat everywhere. And so that then creates automatic emotional responses. So this is when we might feel like our emotions are close to the surface. We might not have as much patience as we normally do. And of course, these automatic emotional responses need to be regulated, because we can't run around being emotional all the time, even though that's how we feel. So what happens is another part of our brain gets involved, which is called the prefrontal cortex, and that's at the front of our brain. And it's responsible for all of our really cognitive tasks. So the analysis that we do every day, our reasoning, our planning, our goal setting, it's where our working memory sits. But one of its really important roles is to regulate what's going on at the back of our brain. Now, the challenge that we have here is that founders have to do incredibly cognitive tasks. So there's lots of moving parts, lots of cognitive flexibility, deep thinking, complex decision-making and strategy. And then what we have is, on top of that, we have all of these emotions that are being triggered at the back of our brain that our prefrontal cortex also has to manage. So this is exhausting. And our prefrontal cortex only has a certain amount of resource to use, and it's exhaustible. So that's why, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you start reaching for the biscuits and the coffee, because your prefrontal cortex is like, I've been regulating these emotions all day, and I've been doing all of this cognitive work, and I don't have any more left. But the thing about this kind of response and this exhaustion is that it's cumulative. So if we are constantly in stress, we're constantly having to do cognitive work, it really amplifies this. And that's when we start to see a decrease in our ability to think, and our emotions becoming much less regulated than normal. And these are the things that we need to notice as founders and that we see all the time.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize the accumulating effect. I know when I talk to a lot of founders through River City Labs, people are obviously burning the midnight oil, and they're working on both sides of the stick. So they're getting up really early, getting and powering through work before the day starts. They're out there having meetings all day, meeting with clients, potential investors, customers. Then they're going in the evening and working on their team, or they're building something. And a lot of people are spending all night and therefore not sleeping. Can you tell us a little bit about the effect of doing that? And if I took a 15-minute nap, will that recover all of that accumulation?
Oh, yes. I am a big supporter of naps. I do it myself. So let me answer the first part of your question first. So when talking about your prefrontal cortex, which is really what we're relying on, because we need it to do those cognitive, really thinking tasks, and we also need it to regulate our emotions. So our primary job is to actually take care of it. And the 3 things that we need to do to take care of our prefrontal cortex is to manage our diet, is to sleep, and to exercise. And these are 3 things that we all know about, but they're the 3 really important things that we need to focus on. And if I was to pick one of those things, it would be sleep. So sleep is when our brain cleans house. It gets rid of all the toxins for the day. It makes the connections that it needs to consolidate memories, and it gets rid of all the information that we don't need anymore. And that resource that we have is refreshed. But there's something that you need to know about sleep, and that is the sleep that we get before midnight is our most restorative sleep. So we have the longest and deepest sleep cycles before midnight. And then after midnight, we have more REM cycles, which is a lighter stage of sleep when we do all of our dreaming. So if we are burning the midnight oil and shifting that sleep cycle into sort of more after midnight, we're not getting that lovely delta wave restorative sleep, or as much of it as we would if we went to bed earlier and got up earlier. So if you are trying to sort of shift your sleep cycle in any direction, I would recommend that you go to bed earlier and get up earlier and start your day earlier. When it comes to the nap, yes, it's a big tick for the nap. And I was actually doing some very heavy work on the weekend, and I actually took a nap in the middle of it. But there's also a trick to napping. So you can only nap for 20 minutes. That's it. If you nap for any longer than 20 minutes, you go into a deeper cycle of sleep, and then it's actually harder to rouse yourself because you go so deep into sleep. And that's why some people say, oh, I can't have a sleep because I feel worse when I get up than before I went to sleep. So the trick is 20 minutes, set your clock, and you only go into that really light sleep, but it's enough to refresh those resources for your prefrontal cortex so you actually feel better.
Amazing tips, thank you. I'll go to our panel now. Panel members, what are some of the things that, you've seen as symptoms, and what are some of the tips, or I hate to say it, hacks or tools that you've called on to help yourself when you see some of these symptoms, some that which obviously Di has described?
Do you want me to start? I'll start. Yeah, it's interesting because sleep is the biggest fundamental in my life. I rotate with shift work and working as a founder as well, full-time founder, but also working shifts. So if I'm not prioritizing rest, my energy and mood really drops. So I've now even, I really enjoy exercise actually, and exercise fills my cup as well. It's, I find it really a fundamental. But if I prioritize that over rest and sleep, it really drags me down for the week. So I now consciously make an effort to make sure that I'm getting enough sleep in my day. So yeah, I think that's really pivotal. So and it's different for everyone as well, and but getting that sleep is what helps me to perform and function really.
That's awesome. Jason?
I'm going to, I love the benefit of nap. I'm a 20-minute napper, best thing in the world. In and out, wake up feeling $1 million. So yeah, definitely a supporter of that one. Yeah, so for me, I think a few years ago when I started out in, tech, I knew I had a pretty big mountain to climb. And so I started my journey sort of trying to build a foundation. Nothing great comes easy, and I knew that I had to build a lot of additional capability and resilience. So, I've been focusing on my health, very strongly for the last few years, my diet, my sleep. I've taken up meditating, and so there's a whole range of different sort of health techniques I've implemented. When I'm sort of slipping down a bit, the things that I notice will be, my mind will just race constantly, and then my sleep gets affected. And I know probably the big red flag for me is when my sleep's mucked up. So when that's not happening, then I sort of go back to first principles and get my routines back in check. More recently, now that I'm a scale up, I even reached out to Dr. Diane, to catch up, just to help me sort of organize my thoughts. So, I think being proactive is the key for me, building a strong foundation, and knowing, I guess, what fills your cup, and then watching for those red flags are quite important as well. Because, when you're tackling really complicated, like in a scale up situation we're in at the moment, it's crazy the amount of stuff that's in your head. And then another technique I've recently learned, is about delegation. And so I already had techniques around setting boundaries for myself and what I can and cannot achieve, and breaking the big challenges down into manageable pieces. And I think regularly going and understanding, have I got too much on my plate, and how do I make boundaries around that, is another important part of my mental wellness.
Jason, what are, before we move on from you, what are some of the things that you've experienced yourself in your day-to-day as you're building your company that looks like you think it's stress? Like, how do you even recognize it?
Yeah, so for me, if I'm constantly thinking about things and I can't get them out of my head, that's a big indicator for me. So I'll be just recently, so we're scaling up now. So I've just hired people. We've got funding and we're growing very quickly, and there's just so many things to do. So I was just finding myself, I guess, unable to have clarity in my mind and have the decision-making capability that I need. I need to be able to make great decisions quickly, often, and I need to be really available and open for a lot of people. And I want to be available and open for people. And one of what I think my great strengths I bring to my company is my positivity and my energy. And I sort of trying to take my company somewhere really great, we think. And so I need to have all that available for people, including my family as well. So I also feel like there's no point if I have a huge day and I go home and then I don't have the headspace and the energy and the positivity for my wife and kids as well. So that's quite often a red flag for me. And it is one of the harder things I think to do for entrepreneurs, is to switch environments like that. Very, very different requirements from my 7 and 8 year old to the executives and investors, and my team at Cake. So that's another red flag for me as well. If I can't change environments well and have, be really good to people in different situations, I know I need to go back and just, if I need to go all the way back to the drawing board, I will. I don't normally have to go too far. I just normally need to go back, rejig things a little bit, and then I'm off again.
Yeah, good to hear. Trish, you obviously wear multiple hats, and talking about the juggling, because you're scaling you mentioned the financial reviews that you had to do earlier this year. What are some of the things that you're facing as a founder when it comes to the stress, and what does it look like? And then, what are the biggest challenges in regards to recognizing it in yourself?
Okay. First of all, I would like to warn people about doing a startup with their partner, because I'm in a startup with my husband, and it's very, very difficult to make time outside of the business for each other. And then, if you bring marriage issues into the business relationship, that's going to really cause a lot of angst. Look, yeah, it's a roller coaster ride. What I try and do is incorporate some escape each day, and whether that be going for a walk with the dog, just reflecting, being grateful for where I'm at. That's what helps me get through each day. I try and do that early in the morning, and then that helps me focus, and it puts me in a good frame of mind to start the day that way. Another escape is to exercise, and I think if you want a healthy mind, you need a healthy body. So I've been able to keep up tennis, and most days I try and fit in a game of tennis. And for me, that's also been an outlet, and helps me get through. But as Jason was saying, it's having the ability to make decisions and have the clarity to be able to make the right decisions. And that's really difficult at times. But you just also need to delegate. Delegate where you can. Have trust in your team members. Let go of perfection. Those things have really helped in us, and also being able to say no. Sometimes I've been a yes person for most of my life, but you can't just keep that up. And yeah, you've got to put time to yourself, as well as your business, as well as your family, and be kind to yourself.
Great advice. We've had a couple of claps from the audience on that one, Trish. So thank you for sharing that, and definitely balancing and juggling personal and professional and building a startup. So fragile, so sensitive. When one of those balls drop, it's very hard to recover. But unfortunately, yeah, great lessons and some great tips there. Daniel, you know, your podcast, you guys have a podcast on Trademark, and you come across as a very, you know, happy-go-lucky, completely, like, you know, enthusiastic and full of life personality, and you exude that. Do you ever get some of the symptoms the guys have talked about, and what does that look like? Because if you do, you hide it very well.
100% I do, Pauline. Yeah, you know, thanks for the kind words. Really appreciate it. I mean, luckily for Ed and myself, we kind of fell into being the face of this business. It wasn't something that we planned, but I suppose potentially our relatability is what has made our sort of approach and our business connect with our audience. But yeah, to answer your question, my God, do I experience those things? You know, we all do. We'd be lying if we don't, right? But you know, I mean, everyone else has talked about some of the most important things, you know, the rest, the exercise, the self-care, you know, 100% has to be everyone's priority. But I mean, it's so easy to forget that when you're an entrepreneur or a founder of a startup, it can so easily become your identity. And I think that's really, really dangerous. You know, we do work so hard, and it can become our lives, so much so that we forget who we are and who we are away from the business. And it's really important to hang on to that, because when your identity becomes the business, then you really do ride those emotional highs and lows, you know, that roller coaster, and you just become susceptible to those wins and losses that you have all the time. And it becomes draining. Without understanding who we are away from the business, you know, we are really susceptible to those downfalls. And I mean, I think knowing who your support networks are, what it is that you like doing away from the business, whether it's going to the pub with your mates, going to see live music, although there's none of that at the moment, which is killing me. But all of these things, doing those things and getting away from the business, that's where I have my best ideas. That's where I feel the freshest. That's where I have things that come to me and I'm like, oh shit, that's the solution to that problem, or that's what we should do. You know what I mean? So really, really prioritizing your own identity outside of the business is crucial, and something that is probably not spoken about enough. And the other thing for us really that helps us in our business is communication, right? So when it comes to mental health and showing vulnerability and talking about some of this tough stuff, it starts at the top, right? There's no point trying to change a culture within a workplace where we're open to talking about mental health if we're not willing to talk about it ourselves. So we're in a funny situation because we're riding the startup journey. We're scaling up now, but we're also a mental health organization. So we're standing for mental health on one side. We're also, you know, going on this business journey on the other. So it's this really funny balance of like, yeah, we're no different to anyone else. We're susceptible to this stuff too. So we talk about that with our team every Monday morning. We talk about, you know, how we're going personally. I openly talk about, you know, struggles that I've had away from work. You know, we've all got families, and families can be bloody difficult sometimes. But yeah, being open about that with our team gives them permission to also feel comfortable to be able to talk about that stuff too. So leading from the top is key. Leading by example is crucial. But yeah, really understanding who you are away from the business is paramount.
Such good advice. You know, and that's the funny thing. You are right. Like entrepreneurs, founders, the process you have to go through to raise money often doesn't allow you to have a vulnerability. You know, when you're on a stage and you have all these people looking at your business and sizing you up, to see your capability, your ability to respond and be resilient. It's quite relentless. And I definitely know when I first joined River City Labs and I saw it on scale with a lot of the work with investment and trying to get people in front of VCs, it really is quite unforgiving. And I found that very inhumane to a degree. And it's unfortunate because I think we've got a lot of work to do as a lot of us who deal with investors. I know, Jason, you work with a lot of investors as well. You know, I think it's our kind of responsibility to kind of talk about it more and actually allow humans to be humans at the same time. If they have a bad day, does not mean that is a testament to their ability to create a business. And I definitely would love to see that talked about more because that is being more vulnerable, including VCs. Jason, yeah.
Yeah, quick one on that. Recent learning I had that I wish I had years ago was around building a relationship with investors. And I think that one way to maybe stack the odds in your favor and be a bit more human and still build investor relations is to take a much longer sort of path with it and, you know, build those relationships up over months. And it takes some of that really sort of finite in and out, pitch, shut the door sort of stress out of the equation, which you probably can't avoid, but it should soften up and personalize that whole process quite significantly. And it's something that we're learning more about and promoting more at Cake. So yeah, I hope that helps a bit.
Oh, it definitely does. Sorry, Dago.
Right, if I can just layer something else on top of that. I mean, the key here is that we have to absolutely normalize seeking mental health support. Make it as normal for founders as seeing their accountant. Right? And the way that we get there, and this is an idea that I really want to spread and encourage. So if you can tell everybody that you talk to this idea, it's about having a line item in the budget whenever you seek investment that is dedicated towards mental health. And this should be the responsibility of the investors, actually, because investors are a lot of the time investing in the founder. It is in their best interests to protect the founder. And so having a line item in there for mental health support or coaching or whatever it needs to be is absolutely critical. And if it's there, then you're kind of obliged to use it. And I think that would go a long way towards just getting us to really, you know, accept that this is part of business. And as, you know, Dan was saying, we all have bad days and there's no getting around that. It's going to happen. So yeah, let's really normalize it and make that the focus.
Yeah, the big VCs are right across this as well, Airtree, Blackbird and the like. And I suppose if we can look to them as leaders and start to bring, you know, some of that mental health focus across the industry, you know, by using them as an example, we could help to normalize it as well.
Well, we'll definitely be putting this part of the panel on blast online, and I definitely have seen a lot of them, like the ones you mentioned, doing a lot of work around that, Jace. So it's really good to see normalizations needed. We do have a question from Todd in the audience, and it's a question for you, Di. What are the kind of signals? I'll start again. What are the telltale signs of physical and otherwise that signal that you have gone over the top from a mental health perspective, not just stressed, but just about burnout? And what do you recommend as a remedy?
That's a big question. Whole webinar just on that question. But so the three ways that you will get signs that you are kind of slipping towards the unwell end of the spectrum will be cognitively. So some people talk about feeling fuzzy and not being as sharp, not being able to think as quickly or be as flexible in their thinking, take on new information, be creative. So it's a general kind of feeling that you're just not as sharp and not up to speed as you normally are. So that's sort of the cognitive signs that you will see. The second is emotional. So because our prefrontal cortex is responsible for managing all of the emotions, and we've got an enormous amount of emotion happening at the moment, if you get worn down and if you don't have the resource to manage your emotions, they'll be very close to the surface. So what we see is people being volatile, tears coming more easily. We see impatience, we see frustration. So generally across the board, those emotions will just be bubbling under the surface, and sometimes it won't take much to trigger them. So that's the emotional part of it. But the really important part is actually the physical signs, because when our amygdala is triggered, it sets off our fight, flight, or fright response. And what that does is it releases a whole heap of chemicals that gets our body ready for action. So the thing to remember is that your body will actually tell you first when you are experiencing distress. So some things that you might feel are just general sort of aches and pains. You might feel a tightening in the chest. You might feel like your breathing is affected. Some people talk about having shallow breathing, so not breathing as deeply as they used to. Headaches are a really common one, tension through the shoulders and the jaw and the neck. So what we need to do is we need to actually tune into our body. And this is what meditation and mindfulness are about, actually. And I can't stress enough how important they are to put into your daily practice. And it doesn't have to be, you know, this huge 1 hour of meditation. It can simply be sitting out on the back deck with a cup of tea and just being in that moment, because mindfulness is just about being in direct experience with your senses in the present moment. So it's in those mindful moments you can check in with your body and say, okay, how do I feel? Am I going okay? And have that reflective space so you can pick up on the signs, because what our brain is really great at doing is normalizing our current state. So if we're at this level of anxiety, it'll say, this is normal. And then we get a little bit elevated and then it'll go, okay, well, this is normal. And so it's very insidious, this sort of accumulation of stress that we carry around with us. So what happens is if we're not taking notice of what's going on in our body and we're not having that reflective, mindful time, when we do start noticing it is when things are out of hand and it's beyond our ability to cope.
Thank you. I think I, for one, have experienced burnout before, and that was a number of years ago. And I experienced a lot of those things. And I didn't even realize probably till 4 months after that I had had basically a meltdown, quit my job, and left a very profitable role at HP. And that was because I completely run myself to the ground and burnt out. And I was becoming irrational, and I couldn't even string sentences or thoughts together. And I was irrational with my family and very triggered. And so that kind of is a telltale sign, is when I'm starting to lose my patience with those that I love around me. And it's kind of, unfortunate consequence of stress without even knowing it. But obviously learned a lot since then. We do have a comment from Christine in our audience. Where isn't this also a part of a paradigm where mental health and economy intersect, that we need to consciously shift? COVID has perhaps given us a wedge to work into the conversation about healthy business, not just hyper efficient business. Now, I wanted to call that out and point to some of our founders. What's your thoughts on that? Is COVID now, given 2020, COVID plus everything else that's going on, has this given businesses and startups an opportunity to change the way we perceive entrepreneurship? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think, 100% it has, I think everyone's just been completely caught off guard and bowled over by this whole thing. And, the conversation right now is exactly where it needs to be. We're seeing it all around us. I mean, as I said before, open lines of communication among teams and letting everyone know, exactly what's going on and keeping everyone informed is crucial to helping, your teams and also founders and entrepreneurs just keep a level head, So, yeah, I think there's as shit as this situation is for a lot of people. We talk a lot about resilience and overcoming adversity and, the sort of journey that a lot of people go on. And fortunately, at the moment, we're all on a very similar journey together. And through every trial, there's always a silver lining that comes out of it. And if the focus on mental health and self-care and healthy workplaces, as you say, as opposed to efficient workplaces, is what comes out of it, well, then that's only going to be, an absolute positive for everyone.
Yeah, totally, Dan. Yeah, I can only see benefits, and I think it's really good to see that digital health and technologies are coming to the forefront as well. Telehealth has had a big increase, and I think this has just made it much easier to have that intersection. The mental health services are becoming more online. I know a couple of friends who are founders in those types of businesses, and they've had a big uptick in activity. And I think all the problems that has been caused, but maybe there's just the opportunity to really keep pushing this along. We've had progress that we haven't been able to achieve for years in a matter of a few months. Telehealth, other countries have done it, but we've been able to push over that hill. And so hopefully we can just keep pushing along, and it starts to become mainstream that mental health is just part of the daily scrum. I'm not a big team, but it'd be nice to be able to link into a service that has digital health, telehealth capabilities, and and check in with everyone. So there's just possibilities are endless.
Jason and Trish, are there anything in your business that you will take on due to 2020 that will kind of bring this to the forefront?
Yeah, so we're a very health conscious business as it is. Looking after each other's health is a core part of our sort of internal values. And, I guess with myself becoming, heading down this mental wellness journey even more so, I'm looking to take those learnings and get them into my team in an appropriate way. I guess it's a little bit of a new concept here. So I'll start with the execs and get their feelings and thoughts on it, and then try and implement it in a way that can have a positive effect across the board. But I do think that it's naive for leaders to think that they're the only ones going through these challenges. And so I'm conscious that I have the ability to have an impact in the mental wellness of my whole team, which then has flow-on effects. So I think it's a great opportunity to take this period of change to sort of move forward in this area.
Right.
Yeah, and I think as an entrepreneur, you have to embrace change, and nothing stays still, nothing stays the same. You have to be agile, you have to just push through. And COVID has taught us it's an external force, it's outside of your control, and you just have to accept it and adapt. And so, yeah, we've had to adapt. We've seen opportunities that weren't there before. We can now get away with doing Zoom meetings comfortably, and that's really helping us reduce travel time and costs. People accept that. And these businesses that used to be traditionally paper-based, a lot of them are our customers. They're willing to go online, so they're open to negotiating with us now more than ever before. So I think you just have to see the positives and adapt, and you'll survive and thrive. That's how I see it.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you, panel members, for sharing. We're nearly at the top of the hour, and I can't believe it's flown so quickly. Again, if anyone would like to connect with any of the amazing founders on the panel, please obviously try hunt them down on LinkedIn or their social handles. You can also find them on some of the links on the River City Lab social channels as well. Before we summarize and close off, I'll just go over to Dr. Di. For our founders and leaders on the call, what are some of the resources that they can go to seek some help or check in with anyone available to them?
Yeah, out of the whole pandemic is that we are having this conversation more openly and routinely. But the other thing is that the resources that are available and the free mental health resources that are available have increased substantially. So if you're not quite sure where to go or what you need, and this is for everybody on the call and everybody that we care about, the first thing that you can do is call the mental health access line. So this is kind of like the first point that you go to, and they will then direct you to services that are most appropriate. So the number for that is 1300 642 255, and perhaps we can put this information up somewhere, Pauline.
Yes.
And there are other services like, Lifeline, Beyond Blue, Headspace, and you can Google them and they're pretty easy to find. So if you just find that you're in a space where you need to talk to somebody immediately, those free services are really excellent. If you find that you would like to have more of a one-on-one conversation and sort of really dig into some issues, you can come and see a mental health professional like me. So you can find me on my website, which is clevermindsconsulting.com.au, and you can call or email as well. But one thing that I want to say about accessing mental health support is that I think sometimes we have it in our mind that if we contact a therapist or a counsellor that we need to kind of lock in and go every 2 weeks for 6 months or something like this. And that's absolutely not the case. Some clients I see for a session and then I don't see them again for another 6 months. So what we need to get into the mindset of is being very proactive about seeking mental health, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be locked in for the long haul. It can be just using the service when you need it, just like going to the dentist, just like going to the GP. And I guess from my own personal perspective and dealing with founders, I have lots of different conversations, and it's not always about mental health issues. Because I have a background in sales and I've started 2 companies myself, I often have conversations with founders about sales strategies or time management or delegation or leadership. So, counselling is really a conversation, and it's whatever you want to talk about. There's no script for it. There's no routine that you have to go through. It's just whatever is on your mind is up for conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Di, and absolutely can attest to that, given I'm such a fan of yours, but just actually the going and checking in and being proactive about it. So without further ado, thank you so much. We've had quite a few thank yous for people in the audience. So thank you to our panels. Thank you to Dr. Di for joining us today on a Friday. We will share some resources via email to everyone who's registered for the event. So don't worry if you've missed some information and details. And just remember to be kind to yourself and forgive yourself, even if it's not going to plan. And be gentle and kind and check in with others around you as well. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a fabulous weekend.